Hi there. Welcome to the From Lab to Launch podcast by Qualio, where we share inspiring stories from the people on the front lines of life sciences. Tune in and leave inspired to bring your life-saving products to the world.
Thanks for joining us on From Lab to Launch today. I'm Meg from Qualio, and it's my pleasure to be your host and introduce you to the movers and shakers of modern life sciences. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and we'd love it if you could give us a review on Apple or Spotify. And if you want to be on the show, please see the application link in the show notes. On today's episode, we're changing course a little. Instead of interviewing a life science company leader, we're speaking to someone who empowers them and helps them connect their companies and helps them grow. Elizabeth Chabe is the CEO of High Touch Group, a marketing consultancy firm specializing in life science clients. Her science marketing playbook, The Giant's Ladder, is a #1 bestseller, and her work has been featured in the New York Times, Entrepreneur, and CNBC, among others. Elizabeth, thanks so much for stopping by today.
Thanks for having me, Meg. I'm excited to be here.
So, Elizabeth, tell us a little bit about science marketing and how is that, if it is, different to marketing in other industries?
Sure. So that's a great question. I think that there is this tension that any of us who have been in the sciences tend to feel between creating great science, doing good work in the lab, and then getting those innovations seen and adopted in the marketplace. And I think that that tension is increased. And many of us are feeling it right now in the present because of decreased federal funding for certain sectors, especially the life sciences in the US. But we've seen this happen before. You know, we've seen funding from venture capital on a slightly for technologies that are slightly further along in their commercialization journeys. We've seen venture capital funding increase and then decrease again, and then increase and then decrease. And we've seen very different funding environments for medtech than what we have for, say, biotech. And so these financial realities are nothing new, but they are different. And so I do think after doing this for about 20 years, that there is a very different way that we need to be marketing scientific innovations, especially if we're looking for adoption in a B2B context, like you're trying to commercialize a home brew that worked really well in your laboratory. You've got a little bit of funding, you're trying to spin out a company that could market this home brew to other laboratories who could benefit from that same technology, for example, and not have to buy reagents outside of kits. That's a very common example, right? But these sorts of commercial endeavors are very different from, say, makeup brands or shoe brands or things that we think of as commercial technology products like phones and computers and tablets, cars, and so on. So there is a very different way that we market those products, and I'm looking forward to diving into that a bit with you.
Yeah, well, let's dive in a little bit more. What makes marketing in IVD and medical device sectors so tricky compared to other sectors in your experience?
Yeah, this is one that's near and dear to my heart because I work with a lot of our diagnostics clients as their strategist, developing their marketing plans. And if the company is early stage, often working with those founders and the early C-levels to determine or help determine their commercialization pathway, just sort of as a whole. But I think one of the biggest challenges happens to be non-marketing technically, and that's regulatory constraints. When we're talking about medtech products, we can't just say anything about them. The language that we use is determined by the regulatory pathway that's required for that particular product, who we market to, how we market, and what we say all change. That's also very much the case if we're talking about launching a product in the US market versus in the EU or Japan. And very often a marketing team hasn't been brought into those discussions, a year or two earlier while the regulatory pathway was being determined for the product. So very often a marketing team might be handed a product that is about to get its 510K, for example, or a CLIA waiver or what have you. but there isn't necessarily a clear path to entering that market except from that regulatory planning. So those are just some of the challenges, but one of the biggest ones is definitely around regulatory planning, kind of having some tension with market realities, and then sort of the requirements that are just natural whenever you're marketing within a regulated space like medtech, for example.
Yeah, definitely create some tension there with toting the line of staying compliant with your marketing. How can marketing teams push creative boundaries without stepping outside those regulatory limits that we were talking about?
Oh, what a great question. I love that. I think one of the most important things that any creative team can do, or any creative team within a marketing department, or maybe you're outsourcing your creative, no matter what though, it all starts with a really good brief. So your creative team is only going to be creative if they're working within a box. And I say that not because we don't want out of the box thinking and creative thinking, but they need to know what the boundaries are, right? And so it's very, very important that the creative team understands, for example, the instructions for use. If we're talking about medtech or diagnostics, they need to know what can we say and what can't we say, and that IFU is going to be one of the most important guidelines for that. That also tells us more about the market. Does the IFU specify, right, that the user is going to be using gloved hands to run this particular test, for example? You know more about who you're marketing to, what the imagery should look like, if you know what use cases that particular technology is going to be used in, right? So that IFU is really important. And then briefing out any other must-haves, can't-haves, red flags, and watch-outs for that team. And depending on the product, you might provide some additional details. You might include any clinical study data that you have. You might include some of the publications if any of the underlying technology has had peer-reviewed, especially publications behind it, or conference proceedings, poster presentations, basically what has been said about this technology before. All of that information is really important for the creative team to be able to understand and digest. And that brief is essentially the cheat sheet, the table of contents for how they should be thinking about that background information that you're providing them. From there, creative teams can be creative because you've essentially given them the boundaries of what they can't say, what they shouldn't be talking about, so that they can really do what they do best, and that is come up with novel ways to get the message out there about that product.
It's a great advice for teams trying to tote that line. Elizabeth, I read that you're a big advocate for data-driven marketing. How can companies use data effectively while staying compliant?
It's a really good question. So let's just talk about the United States for a moment, and then we can sort of talk about rest of world. But a really good rule of thumb is don't use cold lists. Unless you're talking about one-to-one outreach between a sales rep, for example, and a company, or from an R&D group to a purchasing agent or something like that, you really shouldn't be mass emailing people who don't know you. It's rude, number one. It violates CAN-SPAM. If you're in California, it violates other laws. And of course, if we're talking about marketing to Europe, you just can't do that. You're in violation of GDPR, and there are fines attached to GDPR violations. And so making sure you have permission to email everyone that you are emailing is vitally important to making sure that you do have good, clean data that you can work from. So one of the first things that you should do if you are new to a marketing team, maybe you're leading this new marketing team, maybe you've just been handed a CRM of contacts, as you often are in a life sciences company, you want to make sure that those contacts have opted in to receiving communications from you. And in most CRMs, or even if you aren't quite that advanced yet and you're just using email automation software, there should be a record of that opt-in. A great rule of thumb is to use double opt-in, which essentially means somebody signs up for your newsletter and then they also get an email that they have to click confirming that they definitely want to be subscribed to your newsletter. That's just even safer. I know that that can seem limiting at first because it means that for a little while before you really have any awareness around your company, your brand, and your product, it may mean that your email newsletter list is small. And it may mean that you're telling your boss, hey, I don't think we should be emailing, all of these cold contacts who haven't heard from us for 4 years. But the reality is if you do email them, they're unlikely to open the email. Very often you're going to get hard bounces, unsubscribes, and maybe even spam reports. And all of that's just going to make your marketing data look bad. It's going to look like your email campaigns aren't successful. So making sure that you're starting with really clean data. And I'm using the email data example just because it's so common in life science companies to get these really old mailing lists that sales reps have given you, or you've been handed a CRM and nobody from a marketing team has really cleaned the data in years sometimes, or you're a new company and you've been sold a cold list and you're wondering why it's not working. It's because the data is not great. So start with the clean data. And then from there, you can actually measure a little bit better the performance of things like your email marketing campaigns. And just because it would be kind of weird for me to spend the next 20 minutes just talking about email marketing campaigns, although I could totally nerd out about it with you, Meg. I think I just refer to my book or to any of the great guides out there that MailChimp, Revo, HubSpot have put out over the years about how to maintain your email data integrity and how to read your data so you know how to do better next time, so you know how to set up your A/B tests and so on. Just one last point on data management. The other sticky point that I see from a lot of life science companies outside of email data is website data. A lot of them, they might have a Google Analytics account and that's all they have and they don't know how to make heads or tails of it. What I would recommend doing is subscribing to a data aggregator. I use DataBox because it's great. The guy, I don't sell for them, so this is not a sponsored recommendation. This is my personal recommendation because we think it's a great product. The founder is former HubSpot, and essentially he makes it really easy to create these data boards that give you nice views into all of your different KPIs for your website, for your email. There are templates you can use if you don't know what any of those words mean. And so you have an aggregator that you can connect your Google Analytics to, and then it spits out a presentation that's really meant for people who don't understand much about marketing, so that you can get a better understanding for how your website's performing or how a particular campaign was run. And you can connect your CRM to that, your email automation, your website, and so on. So we find those data aggregators really helpful in monitoring campaign as well as channel performance.
That's a great tool, and I love that you touched on data security and data privacy there at the beginning. It's such an important thing in the evolving times of technology. Yeah, Elizabeth, what are some of the most significant challenges you've faced as CEO, and how have you overcome them?
That's a great question too, Meg. I don't know if I have anything new to add to that field, just because, a CEO's job, and I know you interview many of them, is difficult in ways that are difficult to describe, right? You are constantly, especially if you're a 20-person company like mine, or if you are even a small biotech with 80 people in it or 20 people in it, right? You are responsible for the payrolls of the entire company. You are responsible for all of their families, right? So there is a pressure on CEOs that I don't think the average person who's never had to, run a company and have not just P&L responsibility, but responsibility for your staff. I think that's difficult to communicate exactly how big of a challenge that can be sometimes. And so what I recommend for all the CEOs out there, I'm assuming you get a lot of like biotech and medtech startups listening to this. It can be difficult in those early years when you are less sure of product market fit, when you're doing your early fundraising, when a grant doesn't come through that you were really thinking was going to. And so perseverance and mental health, I highly recommend going for that walk, taking that yoga class, meditating in the morning. And some days are just going to be difficult. So keep it up because you're doing important work.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing that. Those lessons learned. Speaking of lessons learned, what have been some of the biggest lessons you've learned on the entrepreneurial side of building High Touch Group?
I think that there are a couple of ways to answer this. I thought early on that I wanted to build a marketing agency, and the way that you did that was by adding more clients and then adding more headcount and so on. And what I've learned over the last, 12 or 15 years of doing this particular company is that I don't know if that model makes a lot of sense. I think it makes a lot more sense to have accounts that you are deeply involved in, that you work with for years at a time, that you're not just expecting people to churn out, every 2 years or something like that. So I think from a business, a marketing agency business model perspective, I've learned that I think it's much more important to have 12 to 15 really interesting retainer accounts and not focus on growth of your company all the time. I think this is actually, advice that I would give startups sort of in general. I think that there tends to be a lot of pressure for infinite growth, grow each year, show more growth, right? And I don't know if in the years that High Touch has grown quite a lot, it's quite honestly stressful. You're bringing in a lot of new hires who don't know what they're doing and are kind of useless for a while. Unfortunately, that's just how it is. And I don't think that that is the times that we've done our best work. I think we do our best work at what we've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years, which is focusing in on these 12 to 15 accounts a year. We don't let more in. It's meant that now we have a long wait list of companies who want to get in, which makes the not only is the churn rate quite low, but we've got this waiting list for if somebody does leave the organization as a client, we have somebody else to pull in. I think if you just kind of say yes to anybody who comes in the door, you're constantly trying to grow, and it's a race to sort of keep up. And then, of course, when somebody churns out and you don't have that wait list of clients who want to get in, you have to downsize the company, or, it's a big, thing. So I think it's really important that companies don't just focus on growing all the time, that sometimes it's more important to just be making an impact in many other ways with a handful of key accounts that are really important, and making sure that you're not constantly trying to just grow for growth's sake.
Yeah, I would posture too that some companies lose themselves on that path of growth for the sake of growth, and it sounds like High Touch really is in tune with your mission and staying in line with delivering for customers.
We try to be, but there are some really interesting companies right now, so it makes it difficult to kind of stay strict about number of accounts, but absolutely.
Yeah, probably hard to say no, but great to have that pipeline when customers move on. Yeah. Being a life science quality professional myself, I'm always curious to add a quality question into the mix. What role does quality and compliance play in the marketing mix for life science companies, and is it a key part of the narrative?
It's huge. It's huge. So I'll just mention 2 really important quality relevant marketing messages that we use fairly often. And the first one just goes back to what we were talking about before with IFUs. You also might see from a similar perspective, other documents that quality might have a hand in either regulating, creating, managing, storing, and so on. And those include certificate of analyses, other reports about products that are being sold. Without quality qualities, really detailed review of all of those materials, we wouldn't have those as marketing materials for scoping campaigns and collateral. And of course, these are some really important conversion sites on websites for products these days, these COAs, IFUs, and so on. And so marketing can get really good information about what's important for prospective customers with these quality documents. So I think that there's a huge role that quality plays there. But also quality processes, if it's a services company or a products company, making sure that it's communicated in public-facing marketing materials that these organizations follow a quality process. Maybe they have an ISO certification, maybe they have other guidelines that quality is involved in, like environmental guidelines, sustainability initiatives, and so on. But all of that is incredibly important to building the brand of a life science company. And so I'm always surprised when I see companies entering new markets, for example. I see this a lot sometimes with Asian companies coming into the US market, for example, but not giving any information about the quality system that they have in place, the procedures they follow, ISO certifications, and so on. So it is very important, I think, in building a brand for a life sciences company and sort of maintaining this level of customer satisfaction that I think demanding life science customers require for things like reagents and other products that they're using in their workflows, and of course, any services that are being provided to them. So it's absolutely important.
I'm wondering if you have any success stories where marketing, regulatory, and product teams work together to make a launch both compliant and successful that you'd want to share with us today.
You know, I am working on one right now. A client is working on a new website, and it's a products-based company. They're in the culture diagnostics space. It's a really interesting company that's got just a really interesting spin on culture media. But because it's not, you know, just the same old culture plates, there is a level of quality conversation that their sales reps have with their customers and that we try to make front and center in their marketing materials. So we just worked with their quality team to develop a COA database that essentially will allow those certificates to appear on the website as part of their normal review process. So essentially there isn't a marketing person or a website editor standing in between them and a COA or an IFU. They get to approve it. And I think that any time that we can remove a person or an AI bot, it doesn't really matter, but a step from a workflow and simplify it so that the people who are best qualified to make a decision of, yes, this is ready and we consider this final, and then it goes out to all of the different touch points, that is always going to reduce just errors downstream. It's very easy to accidentally pull the wrong file from somebody's Dropbox or SharePoint or something, but quality does not do that. A marketing person might not even know the difference between two documents, and in this way, it's a more version-controlled system for quality. So I think it's going to be a huge win for the customer, a huge win for internal processes, keep errors down in documents that go public, and I think it's just going to be a better workflow for all.
Yeah. And then the end user gets that transparency of the COAs right on the website as well.
Exactly.
Elizabeth, what changes or challenges do you see coming for science marketing in the next few years?
The one that I'm talking about a lot right now has to do with how do we look at life science products that we thought were going to get funded one way and probably aren't, and that goes from a VC perspective, and that also goes from a federal funding perspective. I've been in grant-funded research and the venture capital space for about 20 years now, and in a couple of different technology sectors. And what I've noticed is, and across multiple administrations, and when I'm not doing high touch, I'm also on a governor appointed venture fund, the main venture funds, and I've been appointed by both Republicans and Democrat governors. So this is not a partisan statement, but you know, when a door closes, a window opens. And I think it's very important that medtech, diagnostics, biotech, that we don't just rely on NIH funding and that we're looking at alternative sources. Typically in Republican administrations, when I was in academia, we took that to mean, okay, there's going to be, we're going to want to take a closer look at defense broad agency announcements that come out. So these might come out from, Army Corps of Engineers, from the Office of Naval Research, from other Defense Department agencies, sometimes Homeland Security as well. And right now, we're also seeing an increase in funding for space tech through NASA and the Space Force, and I'm sure we're going to see more of that downstream. Now, when I'm thinking about diagnostics specifically, a lot of those are developed for resource constrained conditions, especially if we're thinking about point of care diagnostics like lateral flow tests. So I'll be talking about this a little bit on stage at the Advanced Lateral Flow Conference in La Jolla this October. But really, for a lot of these tests, we can look at other applications that are also resource limited, that don't have access to certain power requirements, and that is space. A lot of the companies that I'm working in right now and the research I'm tracking are in that intersection between space tech and healthcare. Things work differently in space, liquids flow differently, materials respond differently, right? And you're also more resource constrained, both from an actual power requirements or gravity requirements sort of scenario, but also from a user perspective. But a lot of these technologies that we're developing for low and middle income countries, for example, might have another role in space. And we might be able to get that research funded if we start looking at some of these alternative applications for the same technologies. This was something we did all the time in academia, and I'm not seeing it as much in med tech diagnostics as I think we really should. But I think that that's going to be a significant challenge because we can't market a product that doesn't exist, and they're not going to exist if we don't have funding for them. And so it behooves all of us who are in this space, whether we're from a quality perspective, R&D, product management, fundraising, or academic labs and marketing, all sort of working together to think about these alternative funding vehicles and applications for the same technology so we can get good tech out the door and into the hands of people who need it most.
Yeah, I think we saw some of that during COVID, but it sounds like there might be a new revolution of that coming. So that's very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Elizabeth, as an author yourself, I'm interested in hearing your answer to our next question, which is more of a fun one we like to ask each of our guests. If we ran into you at a bookstore or at your local library, in what section will we find you?
Such a good question, Meg. I think I do enjoy historical fiction, and I am an oil painter and a film photographer when I'm not doing high touch group or other science things. And so either I'd be looking at coffee table books of artists, or maybe maybe looking at some historical fiction. I'm currently reading the last book. I know I'm late to the party. I'm reading Hilary Mantel's last book in her Thomas Cromwell series right now, which is great. And I'm also reading a book called The History of Art Without Men, which is not like an anti-male thing, but it really, something like 98% of the curated art spaces in the world are dedicated to male artists. And there have been a lot of really interesting female artists throughout history that just aren't in art history textbooks. And so that's been really interesting, trying to find copies of some of the art that's referenced in that particular book. But I'm a huge reader, so I love that question.
Oh, I'm going to have to pick up that last one. That sounds fascinating.
What are you reading right now, Meg?
Oh, I am between things. So I'm in the mood for something new, and art sounds lovely.
Awesome.
But I usually lean more towards historical fiction as well. So
Awesome. Very cool.
Where can our listeners go if they want to get some marketing support or buy your book?
Sure. So if you are a student or if you're struggling to find funding, please don't pay to buy my book. Just email inquiries@elizabethchabe.com. I'm sure we can get that in the show notes. Say you want a copy of the book and we'll send you a PDF copy. No questions asked. It's more important, I think, that more scientists who are interested in entrepreneurial endeavors get targeted material for them and not this generic marketing stuff. And if you want to, read some stories from the trenches, there's also a little bit of that in there. You can also find the book on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, anywhere you get your books.
Lovely. We'll get those all posted in the show notes. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Meg. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of From Lab to Launch, brought to you by Qualio. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe and give the show a positive review. It really helps us out. For more information about Qualio, our guest today, or to be a guest on a future episode, please refer to the show notes. Until next time.